Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for coming along to the breakfast. As I said before, my name is Ryan Hadrick and I'm one of the conveners of the Society here in Queensland. Thank you very much for attending this breakfast this morning. This is the first time that we've had a breakfast as part of our annual program. Before I introduce the guest speaker this morning, I want to say something about the purpose of this breakfast. This breakfast was created as an opportunity to expand the program, the offering for the conference, but it was also created as an opportunity to invite an additional speaker who, in the opinion of the Society, challenges the zeitgeist of the moment. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room will agree with me that our guest speaker this morning is someone who has certainly challenged the zeitgeist of the moment, certainly in the last 12 months. While she doesn't require any formal introduction, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price is someone who has contributed to our national public discourse well and beyond her years of experience in public office. I first became aware of who she was some years ago when she was on the Alice Springs Town Council as an ordinary councillor and then ultimately as Deputy Mayor. And I remember seeing an interview that she gave at that point in time. I remember remarking to myself almost 10 years ago, wouldn't it be wonderful if this woman participated in the national life of this nation? Unfortunately, to the great fortune of the members of this society, she has stepped up to that higher level of national office, and she is someone who has well and truly contributed to certainly the events of the last 12 months. I doubt we could identify another person in the lead up to the Voice referendum last year who managed to capture the minds and convince Australians of the proper course in the referendum of October last year than Senator Price. We are very grateful for her for participating and leading that charge. She's only been in federal parliament since the last election, elected as a senator for the Northern Territory, but she's certainly packed a punch in the time she's been there. We got lucky last year in about March or April. The position of Shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister became vacant for a variety of reasons. And the Leader of the Opposition saw an opportunity to elevate Senator Price in her first term in Parliament, and she's making a very substantial contribution to that portfolio. As I said before, I doubt there is a person involved in the debate in respect of the Voice last year who managed to speak to the ordinary Australian with clarity. She was articulate, she was persuasive, and she spoke with integrity. We are delighted to have her here today to address us. Thank you very much for coming along. Could you please welcome Senator Price?
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you to all of you here this morning and to the Samuel Griffith Society for the wonderful work and support throughout the referendum. As far as I'm concerned, it was absolutely a team effort. I just tend to, I don't know if it's the Warlpiri or the Irish in me, but I tend to run towards danger as opposed to away from it. But firstly, I want to reflect on parts of the journey of the course of the referendum by taking a look at the history of Labor leadership. Every Labor Prime Minister following Gough Whitlam wanted their own Whitlam moment. Every bleeding heart, self-flagellating, anti-racist do-gooder who sees themselves as the coloniser responsible for our nation's historical wrongs sees Whitlam in themselves. When I see the photo of Whitlam towering over Mr Lingiari, pouring sand into his hands, I think of what the sand symbolises to me. To me, it symbolises welfare dependency, unlimited access to all that is destructive in the modern world, but no tools to manage it. Our land back, but without the ability to create economic independence. Failure of access to private home and land ownership, copious amounts of virtue, and the message that only the government can bestow power upon us Aboriginal folk. Whitlam stigmatised assimilation and instated self-determination. In other words, instead of providing Aboriginal Australia with the tools to progress with the modern world, Aboriginal Australia was left to its own devices and separated from the rest of the country. Left to languish in spiritual connection to land, under control of land council, CEOs, lawyers, not nice ones though, and of course anthropologists. Yeah. Hawke's signing of the Barunga Statement was his Whitlam moment. He failed to deliver on treaty, however, a result of his Labor colleagues feeling threatened by the stance, a move that would lead to the end of his leadership. While some of what the Barunga Statement captures has been delivered without a treaty, such as elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, rights to life, liberty, security of person, food, clothing, housing, medical care, education and employment opportunities, necessary social services and other basic rights, there are components that have not. Certainly a national elected Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisation to oversee Aboriginal and Islander affairs in the form of ATSIC was delivered, but of course failed miserably despite being represented by 800 elected Aboriginal councillors. ATSIC was rightly dismantled in a bipartisan decision under a Howard government due to allegations of corruption and alleged rape. You only have to go so far as Google or Wikipedia to read for oneself that in 2001, ATSIC became embroiled in controversy over litigation surrounding its chairperson, Jeff Clark, relating to his alleged participation in a number of rapes in the 1970s and 1980s after being named by 4 women. Bob Hawke himself said that ATSIC was established that the organisation had let down Indigenous people by deciding that looking after Jeff Clark was more important than looking after ATSIC. As a Warrpiri woman who has lived connected to traditional culture, and I understand the real consequences of customary law, I am grateful that no government has legislated to recognise customary law despite the Barunga Statement calling for such recognition. When customary law is not clearly defined, it can be interpreted however any cunning opportunist may choose. We do, however, have examples of written customary law, and one has to look no further than Arnhem Land's Ngurra Book of Law and read for themselves the violent punishments that deny human rights that are administered to those who break certain laws. Such punishments include women being subjected to torture and rape for breaking law. In fact, as recent as 2002, defence lawyers used recognition of these very customary laws to argue that a 50-year-old Yolngu man, Jackie Pascoe, was acting in accordance to his law when he deprived his 15-year-old promised wife of her liberty and raped her under threat of firearm. The presiding judge, Justice Gallop, in recognising customary law, reduced Pascoe's charge from rape to unlawful sexual intercourse and sentenced him to 24 hours imprisonment. Justice Gallop's comments upon sentencing were, "She didn't need protection from white law. She knew what was expected of her. It's surprising to me Pascoe was charged at all." A stark contrast to the Higgins-Learman case that Janet Albrechtsen has so diligently and eminently reported on. The Labor government and their allies continue to deliberately and methodically ignore the plight of Indigenous women and children who suffer rape and abuse outside the walls of Parliament in conveniently distant, remote communities. Paul Keating's Whitlam moment was his delivery of the Redfern speech in December 1992, a defining moment that, in my opinion, clearly established the now ingrained defeatist notion that non-Aboriginal Australians are responsible for our nation's unjust historical record, and that it has become the responsibility of non-Aboriginal Australia to forever repent for these sins. The words of condemnation that put our nation's path on a trajectory to the voice referendum were. And as I say, the starting point might be to recognise the problem starts with non-Aboriginal Australians. It begins, I think, with that act of recognition. Recognition that it was we who did the dispossessing. We took the Aboriginal lands and smashed the traditional way of life. We brought the diseases, the alcohol. We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. It was our ignorance and our prejudice and our failure to imagine these things being done to us. All of a sudden, in these words, the die was cast. Our responsibilities as Indigenous Australians, along with our agency, were stripped of us, and we could point blame at non-Aboriginal Australia for our racially inherited disadvantage. This significant us and them moment laid the foundations for the resoundingly stagnant and crippling guilt politics we have continued to endure. Such political self-flagellation might lend itself to gaining political popularity, but as we've witnessed, has done nothing to improve marginalised Aboriginal Australian circumstances. To quote a hero of mine, Thomas Sowell, "When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear." Next came Prime Minister Rudd, who never fails to jog our memories of his Whitlam moment whenever issues surrounding Aboriginal Australia take centre stage. How can any Australian forget Rudd's most defining act of virtue in the National Apology? His legacy, the National Apology Foundation, and the creation of what we know now as the ever-widening gap, empty of outcomes and rich with bureaucracy. Prime Minister Gillard, whose Whitlam moment, not as grandiose as Rudd's apology or Keating's Redfern speech, struck two virtuous birds with one stone. Gillard ousted a non-Aboriginal female senator, Trish Crossan, for no other reason but to parachute into federal parliament Australia's first female Aboriginal senator, Nova Peris. Gillard's justification for her captain's pick was that she was very troubled that federal Labor had never been able to count among its number an Indigenous Australian, arguing Peris's selection was a matter of national significance. Peris lasted one term before ending it as she stated on her terms. The consequences of favouring positive discrimination and quotas over merit. In an attempt to impress upon our nation a historical Whitlam moment of his own, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese dragged Australians through a fundamentally racially divisive referendum. From the outset, following the federal election result, it appeared, at least in the polls, that 76% of Australians were in favour of the ambiguous concept known as the voice. To my mind, the polls were not a reflection of the common sensibilities of everyday Australians. I knew that once Australians were presented with the truth, common sense would prevail. We here in this room understand history is there to learn from, and history demonstrated to us that only 8 out of 44 referendums succeeded, and have only succeeded when bipartisan support was present. The Prime Minister and his voice proponents ignored this lesson, but the tide began to turn when, as part of the National Party, under David Littleproud's leadership, we drew a line in the sand in November of 2022 to clearly say what many Australians were terrified at that point to say publicly: no to the voice. The polls encouraged us, with support for the voice slipping to 60%. In April 2023, the Liberal Party room, consisting of a much broader church of opinion and under the patient leader of Peter Dutton, met to finalise the Coalition's position on the voice. The polls reflected our concise determination as support for the voice dropped further to 58%, which set us on a steady course, of course, to the final result. This was the political leadership at work. Sound and true values informed by political instincts, honed by serious knowledge of political history, which enabled not just a courageous decision, but the right decision to be made. This was a team effort across the board, of course, occupying various stages through print media, online, radio, television, and especially social media's many platforms, was vital to our fight. The contributions of many of you here, of course, was instrumental in underscoring the constitutional ramifications of such a dangerous proposal. Janet Albrechtsen, Ian Callanan, Stuart Wood, Amanda Stoker, Chris Merritt, many, many others. On the campaign, we united as Australians for Unity and Fair Australia with evidence-based messaging and engagement to maximise impact. From a Conservative perspective, it was easy to criticise The Voice on the grounds it would simply just be a talk fest. But we needed to do more than just offer common sense. We had to win hearts and minds. The team behind Fair Australia did their research early and knew that if we simply ran common sense arguments, we would lose. We needed to convince Australians that The Voice was bad in principle and dangerous in practice. We also needed to demonstrate how it divided families and communities permanently. Australians would ask, how can a constitutional change that divides our nation by race possibly benefit anyone? While we stood united against constitutional destruction, the Yes campaign demonstrated their division for all to see. Despite outspending us 5-1, the Yes campaign had multiple organisations with several free-range talking heads, talking off script and attacking one another. A vision of The Voice in practice. I often wondered, with all of their corporate-backed millions, when they would actually produce their secret weapon to wipe us out. And of course, take victory. And when it never eventuated, I figured, why should I be surprised that individuals who have been tasked with the responsibility of improving the lives of our most marginalised for decades and funded in the millions to do so, have again squandered millions only to fail? The result was one with belief in our nation, respect for the rule of law, value for freedom of speech, and rights in our liberal democracy. Looking toward the future and understanding that the Prime Minister had no real plan at all to improve the lives of our most marginalised. The task is left to us to continue to work together to do so. Organisations like the Samuel Griffith Society have an important role to play in fighting back against regressive Labor and Green bullies. The economic development of our country, as well as our most marginalised, is at stake. With your help, my aim is to eliminate the double standards that exist in our great nation, where our marginalised continue to live in diminished existence in socialist enclaves under the Land Rights Act, where they are governed by gatekeepers known as land councils, and communal ownership of land delivers no opportunity for economic empowerment, but royalties provide for yet another form of passive destructive welfare. Private home ownership and private land ownership should be available to all Australians, instead of being withheld from Aboriginal Australians under native title or the Land Rights Act. I want to see traditional owners become job creators in their own right, because we know when parents are working, children are going to school, getting an education and attaining freedom of choice. And only when we begin to serve Australians on the basis of need instead of race will we see the lives of our most marginalised improved. This, of course, must be done together. starting with empowering the individual, then our families, our communities, and of course, our great country, Australia. The ill-conceived voice to Parliament failed to capture the bigger picture, and so did Prime Minister Albanese and his predecessors before him. Just like our journey to defeat the voice, I need the help of all of you in this room to achieve the bigger picture, because when we lift our marginalised, we lift everyone else with us. Thank you very much.
I hope you're awake and ready for a very big day after a rousing start like that. You know, the Samuel Griffith Society is a non-partisan organisation, but we are so blessed to be able to have people with the intellect and the courage from whatever political party they may come, willing to come here and express with such eloquence their belief in what it will take for a strong and fair future for all Australians. You know, Jacinta, you might say that it's the combination of the Warlpiri and the Irish that makes you run to danger. I'm conscious that you've got a mad Scotsman at home backing you up. But you might call it madness. I think it's the courage that's embodied by the ethic you two bring to the task of public service that means you are willing to do difficult things when other people would walk away. And it's my observation that even though it might be rocky from time to time, fortune does favour the brave. And it's people like you that really do make a difference to the course of this nation. Well, I hope you got a little bit of a sense from Senator Price's talk of the importance that we have, to use a term popular in the last year or two, some real truth-telling about what it will take to have Australia move forward for all people, no matter what the colour of their skin or their background might be. And some of the truth we got from Senator Price's talk this morning was that the real action in change on this front happens in the home, that it happens in our families, and that it happens at the level of the individual, albeit with the support of communities. There's a truth that needs to be told about how our history is not exclusively awful, and that while there are moments about which people may not look back on with pride, there are also wonderful stories of Australians doing good things together in a way that represented the very opposite of the identity politics on which so many people are hung up at present. There's truth-telling too in what Senator Price does to fight for a better daily experience for women and children in our remote communities. And it is my deep hope that that advocacy leads to significant change in the priorities of people in our urban areas. But there's also an important truth in her willingness to say something perhaps unpopular in polite circles, and that is that the solutions to the challenges facing some people in Indigenous Australia does not exclusively lie with the self-flagellation or virtue signalling of urban people. It doesn't lie with doctors' wives making themselves feel virtuous around the brunch table. It doesn't involve empty gestures, apologies, as though those would be enough to transform the daily experience of the child with too little to eat or without a safe place to sleep at night. The answer does not, as Senator Price so well says, lie in the subtle racism of exceptionalism or of lower expectations, but rather, as you articulate better than I think anybody on our national stage at present, it lies in the deep equality and dignity that comes from universalism, from valuing that which is on the inside and the unique human individuality with which we are each bestowed. And you embody a passion for unity, equality and dignity for all Australians that is surely the foundation upon which this nation will achieve wonderful things into the future. Colin, Jacinta, thank you for everything you do, both by speaking this morning, but in your daily work to make our country reach its potential.